A woman's voice breaks the silence. "He doesn't belong here. Get him out of my sight." The cabin erupts. Phones go up. A flight attendant tries to de-escalate, and in the middle of it all, a quiet 8-year-old Filipino boy, sitting alone in first class, clutches his tablet with trembling hands. He whispers, "Please, I didn't do anything," but no one listens. Not yet. What happens next will leave every passenger stunned and change the lives of everyone on board forever. This is a story about prejudice, power, and the pure heart of a child whose quiet brilliance shattered an entire plane's assumptions. Stay with us, because you will not believe what happens in the next 10 minutes. Isaiah Manalo had memorized the boarding procedures exactly as his father had taught him. Passport in the left pocket of his navy blue blazer, boarding pass in the right, tablet secured in his backpack with his notebooks, and the small stuffed tiger his mother had given him before she passed. At 8 years old, he was flying alone for the 3rd time, and each journey felt like a mathematical equation. Follow the steps precisely and the result would be predictable. The San Francisco International Airport hummed with morning activity as Isaiah stood patiently beside the gate agent, his wire-rimmed glasses sliding slightly down his nose. His father, Victor Santiago, had arranged everything meticulously before departing for his business trip to Singapore the previous night. "Remember, Isaiah," his father had said, kneeling to meet his eyes, "you're representing not just yourself, but all the brilliant young minds who never get these opportunities. Make me proud, but more importantly, make yourself proud." Isaiah had nodded solemnly. The weight of becoming the youngest inductee into the International Mathematics Hall of Fame pressed on his small shoulders, but numbers had always been his sanctuary. When the world became too loud, too unpredictable, he could retreat into the elegant certainty of equations. "First-class passengers may now begin boarding," announced the gate agent, her voice cutting through Isaiah's thoughts. The boy stepped forward, shoulders squared despite his height, which barely reached the counter. He presented his boarding pass with a practiced politeness that often surprised adults. "Flying alone today?" asked the agent, her expression softening as she scanned his ticket. "Yes, ma'am," Isaiah replied, his voice quiet but clear. "My father arranged everything. I'm going to New York for a mathematics ceremony." The agent smiled. "Well, aren't you the accomplished young man? Do you need any assistance boarding?" Isaiah shook his head. "No, thank you. I know the procedures." As he walked down the jet bridge, clutching his backpack straps, Isaiah mentally reviewed the path to seat 1A, forward cabin, right side, window seat. The calculations calmed him. They always did. The flight attendant at the aircraft door, Alana Ruiz, greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, young sir. May I see your boarding pass?" Isaiah presented it promptly. "Seat 1A, she nodded, checking his documentation thoroughly. "Would you like help finding your seat?" "No, thank you," Isaiah said. "It's the window seat in the first row on the right." Alana's eyes twinkled with amusement. "That's exactly right. Enjoy your flight, Mr. Manalo." Isaiah navigated to his seat with practiced precision, stowed his backpack beneath the seat in front of him, and settled into the plush leather. He removed his tablet, opened his advanced calculus problems, and began to work, his small fingers moving across the screen with remarkable dexterity. The cabin gradually filled around him, but Isaiah remained absorbed in his equations, barely noticing the curious glances from boarding passengers. A middle-aged businessman paused beside his row, checked his boarding pass twice, then reluctantly took seat 1B beside the boy. "Hello?" Isaiah offered politely before returning to his tablet. The businessman, Gerald Park, a retired investment banker, nodded curtly and opened his newspaper. At the rear of the first-class cabin, in seat 3C, a quietly observant man in a grey suit took his place. Brandon Ellis surveyed the cabin with practiced nonchalance, his Federal Air Marshal credentials concealed beneath his jacket. His eyes lingered momentarily on Isaiah, noting the unusual sight of a child traveling alone in first class, before continuing his routine scan of the passengers. Diane Miller boarded last among the first-class passengers, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her tailored suit and immaculate blonde bob projected the corporate authority she desperately clung to after her recent demotion at Santiago Industries. Her jaw tightened when she saw her seat assignment, 2C, not the window seat she preferred. As she stowed her designer carry-on, her gaze fell on Isaiah. Her eyes narrowed, taking in his brown skin, his focused expression, the expensive tablet displaying complex equations. Something inside her, a toxic mixture of resentment, prejudice, and the humiliation of her recent professional failures, began to simmer. "Excuse me," she said sharply to Alana, who was assisting another passenger. "Why is that child sitting alone in first class?" Alana turned, her professional smile unwavering. "All our passengers have assigned seats, ma'am. Is there something I can help you with?" Diane lowered her voice, though not enough. "It just seems unusual. A child that age alone in first class. Shouldn't there be some sort of guardian?" "Our unaccompanied minor procedures have been followed correctly," Alana assured her. "Everything is in order." Diane took her seat, but her eyes remained fixed on Isaiah, who continued solving his equations, oblivious to her scrutiny. The plane pushed back from the gate, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their flight time to New York. Isaiah put his tablet aside during takeoff, watching the ground fall away beneath them with scientific curiosity. The forces of lift and thrust, the careful balance of aerodynamics, another beautiful equation made real. Once they reached cruising altitude, Alana began the first-class beverage service. She approached Isaiah with special attention. "What would you like to drink, Mr. Manalo?" "Apple juice, please," he replied. "No ice." From across the aisle, Diane watched this exchange with mounting irritation. The special treatment, the comfortable familiarity, it all fed her growing sense of injustice. When Alana brought her sparkling water, Diane grabbed her wrist. "That boy," she whispered urgently. "How did he get a first-class ticket? Is he with someone?" Alana gently removed her hand. "Ma'am, I'm not at liberty to discuss other passengers. I can assure you all our boarding procedures were followed correctly." As the flight progressed, Isaiah alternated between his calculus problems and reading an advanced physics textbook. Gerald Park occasionally glanced at the boy's tablet, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to astonishment at the complexity of the equations the child was solving. 2 hours into the flight, Isaiah closed his eyes for a brief rest. Diane seized the opportunity. She rose from her seat, approached Alana in the galley, and spoke in urgent, hushed tones. "I don't feel comfortable with that child sitting there unattended. Something isn't right. I work for a major corporation and I know security protocols. This is highly irregular." Alana maintained her composure. "Ma'am, I've verified his documentation myself. He's traveling as an unaccompanied minor with all proper authorizations." Diane's voice rose slightly. "But in first class. Look at him. He doesn't belong here." The words hung in the air, their implications clear. Several passengers turned to look. Isaiah opened his eyes, suddenly aware of the tension. Brandon Ellis shifted slightly in his seat, his attention now fully engaged. "Ma'am," Alana said firmly, "please return to your seat." Diane complied, but the seed had been planted. She began whispering to the passenger beside her, casting frequent glances at Isaiah. The boy tried to return to his equations, but for the first time that day, the numbers couldn't shield him from the growing discomfort of being watched, judged, questioned. As the beverage cart came around again, Diane accidentally bumped into Isaiah's seat, causing him to spill his apple juice on his tablet. In the momentary confusion, something slipped from her hand into his open backpack. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Let me help you clean that up." Isaiah dabbed at his tablet with a napkin. "It's okay. The case is waterproof." Diane returned to her seat, a calculated gleam in her eye. 20 minutes later, she suddenly stood up, her voice cutting through the cabin's ambient noise. My phone is missing. I had it just a moment ago." The cabin's atmosphere instantly changed. Passengers began checking around their seats. Alana approached Diane quickly. "Ma'am, please calm down. We'll help you look for it." Diane's eyes fixed on Isaiah. "I had it when I was standing by his seat, when I helped him with the spill." All eyes turned to the small boy, who looked up from his tablet with confusion. "Check his bag," Diane demanded, her voice rising. "I bet it's in there." The accusation hung in the pressurized cabin like invisible smoke, suffocating the atmosphere. Isaiah's eyes widened behind his glasses, confusion etched across his young features as he processed the woman's words. "My bag?" he asked softly, his voice almost lost in the growing murmurs around him. Alana Ruiz placed herself between Diane and Isaiah, her posture protective yet professional. "Ma'am, Please lower your voice. We'll help you find your phone, but we don't make accusations against other passengers. Diane's voice rose further, her perfectly manicured finger pointing directly at Isaiah. That boy has been acting suspicious since boarding. A child alone in first class. Now my phone disappears right after I pass his seat. This isn't a coincidence. From 2 rows back, Brandon Ellis observed silently, his hand discreetly activating the camera function on his own phone. As a federal air marshal with 15 years of experience, he'd developed an instinct for manufactured confrontations. Something about Diane's timing felt rehearsed, calculated. Gerald Park shifted uncomfortably beside Isaiah. Perhaps we should just check the boy's bag and clear this up, he suggested, his voice carrying the weight of perceived authority that came with his grey hair and expensive suit. Isaiah, hands trembling slightly, zipped open his backpack. You can look, I didn't take anything. Alana hesitated, torn between protocol and de-escalation. Sir, this isn't standard procedure. Just look, Diane demanded, her voice escalating to a shout that made several passengers flinch. He doesn't belong here, get him out of my sight! The cabin erupted. Phones came up recording the confrontation. Passengers from economy class craned, their necks to see the commotion. Isaiah clutched his tablet with trembling hands, whispering words that barely carried beyond his seat. Please, I didn't do anything. But no one listened. Not yet. Alana, maintaining remarkable composure, knelt beside Isaiah's seat. May I look in your backpack, sweetheart? Just to resolve this situation? Isaiah nodded, his eyes downcast as he handed over his backpack. Alana carefully removed the contents, a notebook filled with equations beyond college level, a dog-eared physics textbook, a small case of pencils, his passport holder, and the worn, stuffed tiger tucked carefully at the bottom. And there, wedged between his notebook and textbook, was a sleek smartphone in a designer case, distinctly out of place among a child's belongings. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Isaiah stared at the phone in genuine shock. That's not mine, he said, his voice cracking. I've never seen that before. That's my phone, Diane exclaimed triumphantly. I knew it. He stole it while I was helping him. Tears welled in Isaiah's eyes. No, I didn't take anything. I was doing math this whole time. A young mother across the aisle, Kiara Thompson, had been filming the entire exchange. She frowned, reviewing the footage on her phone. Something didn't add up. Alana held up her hand for silence. Everyone, please calm down, sir, she addressed Gerald Park. Would you mind changing seats temporarily while I sort this out? Gerald nodded stiffly and moved to an empty seat farther back. Alana sat beside Isaiah, speaking quietly to the distressed child while examining the phone. The captain's voice suddenly came over the intercom. This is your captain speaking. Due to a situation in the cabin, we'll be making an unscheduled landing at Chicago O'Hare. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Isaiah's small shoulders slumped. Tears streaked down his cheeks as he whispered, Can I call my dad? Please. I need to call my dad. Of course, Alana assured him, her own voice tight with controlled emotion. As soon as we land, Diane sat back in her seat, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. Passengers around her began whispering, some casting sympathetic glances at Isaiah, others nodding in grim agreement with Diane's accusations. Always trust your instincts, an older woman said loudly from the second row. You can never. Be too careful these days. Brandon Ellis continued recording discreetly. His eyes narrowed as he reviewed the footage. He'd captured something interesting. A moment when Diane had stumbled against Isaiah's seat. The angle wasn't perfect, but there was a distinct movement of her hand toward the boy's open backpack. The plane began its descent into Chicago, the mood in the cabin tense and divided. Some passengers had moved away from Isaiah's row, as if theft were contagious. Others watched the sobbing child with growing discomfort and doubt. Ciara Thompson, still reviewing her video, suddenly straightened in her seat. She'd captured something. A whisper from Diane to the passenger beside her just before she'd announced her phone missing. Just wait. Let's see how he explains this. Ciara glanced at Diane, then at the weeping boy. Her finger hovered over the send button, ready to share the video with the flight attendant. As the plane touched down at O'Hare, Isaiah wiped his tears with the back of his hand. Despite his distress, there was a quiet dignity in how he straightened his glasses and squared his small shoulders. I didn't steal anything, he said to Alana, his voice steadier now. My dad says the truth always comes out. Always. Alana squeezed his hand. I believe you, Isaiah. We'll sort this out. Through the windows, passengers could see police vehicles approaching the aircraft, their lights flashing against the midday sun. The captain announced that everyone should remain seated until authorities boarded. Diane watched the approaching officers with undisguised satisfaction. Justice is about to be served, she remarked to no one in particular. What she didn't see was Brandon Ellis sending his video to his supervisor, or Kiara Thompson approaching Alana with her phone extended, showing her the damning footage she'd captured. And no one, least of all Diane Miller, saw the 3 black SUVs speeding across the tarmac toward the plane, led by a man, whose calm exterior masked a fury cold as interstellar space. The cabin door opened. 2 police officers boarded, their expressions grave as they approached the first-class section. Alana met them halfway, speaking in hushed tones and gesturing toward both Isaiah and Diane. Officers, Diane called out, her voice carrying artificial sweetness. The evidence is clear. The phone was in his bag. 1 officer approached Isaiah, while the other listened to Alana's explanation. The first officer, a stocky man with a compassionate face, knelt beside Isaiah's seat. Son, can you tell me your name? He asked gently. Isaiah Manalo, the boy replied, his voice small but clear. My father is Victor Santiago. He's in Singapore, but his number is in my emergency contact information. The officer's expression changed subtly at the mention of Victor Santiago, the tech magnate, whose innovations had revolutionized global communications. We'll contact him right away, he assured Isaiah. The second officer approached Diane. Ma'am, we have some questions about the allegations you've made. What questions? Diane scoffed. The evidence speaks for itself. The phone was in his bag. Yes, the officer replied evenly. But we've received some concerning video footage suggesting the phone may have been planted. The blood drained from Diane's face. That's ridiculous. Who would do such a thing? From his seat, Brandon Ellis finally stood, revealing the badge concealed beneath his jacket. Federal Air Marshal, he announced, his voice carrying authority that silenced the cabin instantly. I have video evidence that shows this woman, he pointed directly at Diane, slipped that phone into Isaiah's bag during a staged accident. She framed this child. I saw it. I filmed it. Gasps filled the air. All eyes turned to Diane, whose expression cycled rapidly from confidence to confusion to fear. That's absurd, she stammered. Why would I? Kiara Thompson stood up. I have it too, she called out, holding up her phone. And something else. She whispered, just wait. Let's see how he explains this. I caught it all on video. The atmosphere in the cabin transformed in an instant. Accusatory glares shifted from Isaiah to Diane. The boy sat quietly, watching the scene unfold with eyes that seemed far older than 8. And then a new voice entered the cabin, deep, controlled, and carrying the unmistakable edge of barely contained fury. Where is my son? Victor Santiago stood in the aircraft doorway, a commanding presence despite his average height. His tailored suit couldn't disguise the athletic build of someone who had fought his way up from humble beginnings in Manila to the pinnacle of Silicon Valley. His eyes, the same deep brown as Isaiah's, scanned the cabin with laser precision until they found his son. Every passenger felt the temperature drop as Victor moved forward, flanked by 2 security personnel whose subtle earpieces and vigilant postures marked them as highly trained professionals. The cabin fell into complete silence, broken only by the soft sounds of Isaiah's sniffling. Dad, Isaiah whispered, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. Victor reached his son in 4 measured strides, kneeling beside seat 1A. His expression, previously hard as granite, softened as he gently adjusted Isaiah's glasses. Are you hurt? He asked quietly, his Filipino accent emerging slightly with emotion. Isaiah shook his head. Just scared. They found a phone in my bag, but I didn't take it, Dad, I promise. I know, Victor said, his voice steady. I have. Never doubted you, Anak. He stood, one hand remaining protectively on Isaiah's shoulder, and faced the cabin. The transformation was instantaneous, from concerned father to corporate titan whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations. I am Victor Santiago, he announced, though from the widening eyes throughout the cabin, it was clear many passengers were already making the connection. This boy is my son, He's not just any child, he's a genius on his way to make history, and every one of you treated him like a criminal because of how he looks." His voice remained measured, but carried to every corner of the cabin. "Shame on you." Diane Miller had frozen in her seat, her face drained of all color as recognition dawned. The CEO of Santiago Industries, her employer, was standing feet away, defending the child she had just framed. Her mouth opened, but no words emerged. Brandon Ellis stepped forward, addressing both Victor and the police officers. "Sir, officers, I have clear evidence of misconduct." He held up his phone. "Ms. Miller deliberately planted her phone in the boy's bag during a manufactured incident. I captured it from my position." Kiara Thompson stepped into the aisle as well. "I have additional footage," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness, "including Ms. Miller making comments that prove premeditation." The lead police officer nodded. "We'll need statements from both of you." Victor's gaze found Diane, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Ms. Miller, from marketing, correct? Recently reassigned after the Singapore project failure?" Diane's face contorted with a mixture of shock and terror. "Mr. Santiago, there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding," Victor cut her off, his voice dangerously soft. "The only misunderstanding was yours, in believing you could harm my son without consequences." Alana Ruiz approached, her professional demeanor intact despite the chaos. "Mr. Santiago, on behalf of the airline, I want to express our deepest apologies for what your son experienced today." Victor acknowledged her with a slight nod. "Ms. Ruiz, correct? Isaiah mentioned your kindness when he called. You were the only adult who showed him basic human dignity." "Thank you." Alana's eyes glistened. "He's an extraordinary young man, sir." The police officers conferred briefly, then approached Diane. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. There are serious allegations of filing a false report, endangering an aircraft, and—" the officer glanced at Victor's stoic expression. "Potentially other charges." Diane stood shakily. "This is absurd. I'm a respected executive. You can't possibly—" "Former executive," Victor corrected calmly. "As of this moment." The cabin watched in stunned silence as the officers escorted Diane toward the exit. Her final desperate plea echoed back, "Mr. Santiago, wait!" But it was too late. The remaining passengers sat in uncomfortable silence, many avoiding eye contact with Victor and Isaiah. Gerald Park, who had suggested searching the boy's bag, studied his hands with sudden intense interest. Victor turned to his son. "Are you ready to go, Isaiah? We can arrange another flight tomorrow." Isaiah surprised everyone by shaking his head. "No, Dad, I still want to go to New York." He straightened his shoulders. "The ceremony is important. I've been preparing my speech." A hint of pride flickered across Victor's face. "Are you certain?" Isaiah nodded. "Numbers don't judge people, Dad. You taught me that. I still want to accept the award." Victor studied his son's face, then nodded. "Very well." He turned to the captain who had emerged from the cockpit. "If possible, we'd like to continue to New York." The captain nodded. "We'll need to refuel and file a new flight plan, but we can be airborne again in about an hour." Victor addressed the cabin one final time. "My son will be continuing to New York. If anyone feels uncomfortable remaining on this flight, alternative arrangements will be made for you at my company's expense." No one moved. As the situation de-escalated, passengers began whispering among themselves. Some cast shamefaced glances toward Isaiah, who had returned to his tablet, once again immersed in his equations as if creating a mathematical shield against the world's cruelty. Brandon Ellis approached Victor. "Mr. Santiago, I'd like to apologize for not intervening sooner. I needed to gather evidence without alerting Ms. Miller." Victor extended his hand. "You did your job, Marshal." "Thank you." Kiara Thompson hesitantly approached next. "Mr. Santiago, I'm so sorry about what happened. I should have shown the flight attendant my video sooner." Victor's expression warmed slightly. "You spoke up when it mattered, Ms. Thompson. Few people do." As the aircraft prepared for its continued journey, Victor took the seat beside his son. Isaiah leaned against his father's shoulder, the tablet momentarily forgotten. "Dad," he whispered, "why did she do it?" Victor was silent for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Some people, when they feel small inside, try to make others feel smaller. It's not about you." "Hanak, it never was." Isaiah considered this, his brilliant mind processing the emotional equation. Like negative numbers trying to make positives negative too? A soft smile touched Victor's lips. Something like that. As the plane finally took off for New York, the cabin atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Flight attendants moved through with subdued efficiency. Passengers spoke in hushed tones or remained silent, many wrestling with their own complicity in what had transpired. Isaiah eventually fell asleep against his father's shoulder, the emotional toll of the day finally catching up to him. Victor remained awake, one arm protectively around his son, his mind already formulating how this incident would become a catalyst for change. In the last row of first class, Gerald Park watched the father and son with growing discomfort. He had been quick to assume the worst about Isaiah. He had supported searching the child's bag. The shame sat heavy in his chest, an unfamiliar and unwelcome weight. As the flight neared its final hour, Isaiah awoke and returned to his equations. Victor made several quiet phone calls, and in the minds of every passenger, the same question echoed. How had they all been so willing to believe the worst about a child? The New York skyline emerged through scattered clouds as Flight 1726 began its final approach to JFK International Airport. Isaiah pressed his forehead against the window, watching the iconic buildings come into view with quiet wonder. Behind the wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes reflected not just the cityscape, but a wisdom beyond. His years, a day older, perhaps years wiser. It looks different from the last time, he said softly to his father. Victor nodded. The city never stays the same. Like mathematics, always building on what came before. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, passengers gathered their belongings in subdued silence. The events in Chicago had cast a long shadow, prompting uncomfortable self-reflection. Gerald Park kept glancing toward Isaiah, words of apology forming and dissolving on his lips. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off, no one rushed to stand. Instead, an unspoken agreement seemed to pass through the cabin. Isaiah and Victor would exit first. Alana opened the aircraft door with a warm smile specifically for the boy. Mr. Manalo, it has been an honor having you aboard. I look forward to reading about your achievements. Isaiah's solemn face brightened momentarily. Thank you for believing me, Ms. Ruiz. As father and son moved toward the exit, Gerald Park finally found his courage. Mr. Santiago, Isaiah, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I made a terrible judgment today. I'm deeply sorry. Victor regarded him coolly, but Isaiah tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad, remember what you said about forgiveness last month? A complex emotion passed across Victor's face before he extended his hand to Gerald. My son believes in second chances, Mr. Park. I'm learning to follow his example. The terminal bustled with typical New York energy as Isaiah and Victor emerged from the jet bridge. To Isaiah's surprise, a small delegation awaited them, representatives from the International Mathematics Hall of Fame, alerted by Victor's calls from Chicago. Dr. Eleanor Chen, the organization's director, approached with evident concern. Isaiah, Mr. Santiago, we heard about the incident. If you'd prefer to postpone tomorrow's ceremony. No, Isaiah interrupted with unexpected firmness. I've been preparing for this. One person's actions shouldn't change that. Dr. Chen's expression softened with admiration. Well then, your hotel suite is ready and the car is waiting. As they navigated the terminal, Isaiah noticed people glancing at their phones, then up at him with expressions of recognition. The incident had already gone viral, and Isaiah Manalo was trending across social platforms. In the luxurious privacy of the limousine, Isaiah finally asked the question that had been forming since Chicago. Dad, what's going to happen to Ms. Miller? Victor gazed out at the passing cityscape. She'll face legal consequences for her actions, but more importantly, she'll live with what she revealed about herself today. Will you press charges? Victor studied his son's expression. That depends partly on what you want, Isaiah. Isaiah considered this with the same careful deliberation he applied to complex equations. I think she needs help, not punishment. She was very angry inside. Victor's eyes glistened briefly. When did you become so wise, Anak? Probably around the time you taught me about prime numbers, Isaiah replied with the first genuine smile since the incident. The Plaza Hotel welcomed them with discreet efficiency. Staff, members clearly briefed to provide privacy and comfort. In their two-bedroom suite, Isaiah immediately unpacked his presentation materials, spreading papers across the dining table with methodical precision. You should rest, Victor suggested, loosening his tie. Isaiah shook his head. I need to revise my speech. What happened today changes things. Victor observed his son with quiet pride. How so? Before I was just going to talk about mathematics. Now, Isaiah adjusted his glasses. I think I need to talk about something more important. Throughout the evening, Isaiah worked diligently, occasionally consulting his father, but mostly lost in concentrated thought. Room service delivered dinner, which Isaiah barely touched, too absorbed in his revisions. At precisely 9:30 p.m., Isaiah placed his pencil down. Finished. Victor, who had been answering emails on his laptop, set his work aside. May I hear it? Isaiah hesitated, then nodded. He stood straight, cleared his throat, and began to speak, not with the voice of an 8-year-old, but with the clarity of someone who had glimpsed both the beauty and cruelty of the adult world in a single day. Mathematics has always been my safe place, he began. Numbers don't judge you by how you look or where you come from. They don't make assumptions about your worth based on your appearance. As Isaiah continued, Victor sat perfectly still, witnessing his son transform trauma into wisdom before his eyes. Today, on my way to this ceremony, I experienced what many people face every day: prejudice, assumptions, judgment. It hurt. It was scary. Isaiah's voice wavered slightly but recovered. But it also taught me something important. Brilliance means nothing without kindness. Knowledge means nothing without understanding. Isaiah met his father's gaze directly. I accept this honor not just for myself, but for every child who's ever been told they don't belong, for every person who's been judged before being known. The greatest equation we need to solve isn't in mathematics. It's in how we see each other. Victor sat in stunned silence as Isaiah concluded. Then, wordlessly, he opened his arms. Isaiah stepped into his embrace, finally allowing himself to be simply a child again, if only for a moment. Later that night, as Isaiah slept peacefully in the adjacent room, Victor stood by the window overlooking Central Park. His phone buzzed with a message from his legal team. Video evidence from the flight had gone viral. Public opinion had swung dramatically. Calls for corporate and airline accountability were mounting. Isaiah's name was becoming a symbol for conversations about bias and prejudice in America. Victor set his phone aside and gazed at the city lights. Tomorrow, his son would make history, not just as the youngest inductee into the Mathematics Hall of Fame, but as a catalyst for something far more significant. In his sleep, Isaiah clutched the worn, stuffed tiger, his brilliant mind finally at rest. Tomorrow would bring cameras, applause, and recognition, but tonight he was simply a boy who had stood his ground when the world tried to move him, and that, Victor thought, was perhaps the most complex and beautiful equation of all. Morning light filtered through the suite's curtains, casting geometric patterns across Isaiah's neatly arranged presentation materials. The boy had been awake since 5 a.m., reviewing his speech with the same methodical precision he applied to differential equations. Each word was carefully chosen, each pause deliberately placed. In mathematics, timing and sequence mattered. Isaiah approached public speaking with the same disciplined mindset. Victor emerged from his room at 6:30, already dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He paused in the doorway, observing his son with quiet pride. Isaiah sat cross-legged on the floor, reciting his speech to his stuffed tiger propped against a chair. "The tiger giving you good feedback?" Victor asked, his voice warm with affection. Isaiah looked up, a small smile crossing his face. "Tiggy is a good listener. He never interrupts." "A valuable quality," Victor agreed, crossing to the coffee machine. "Are you hungry? We could order breakfast." Isaiah shook his head. "My stomach feels funny, not sick, just jumpy." "Butterflies," Victor said, preparing a cup of black coffee. "It's normal before speaking to an audience." "Did you get them before your TED Talk?" Victor smiled. "Every time I speak publicly, even after 20 years." This revelation seemed to comfort Isaiah, who stood and carefully smoothed his presentation notes. "Dad, do you think people will listen? Really listen?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Victor set his coffee down and knelt to meet his son's eyes. "Some will, some won't, but the ones who do, they're the ones who matter." Isaiah nodded solemnly. "Like in probability theory, not every outcome is guaranteed, but some have higher values than others." "Exactly," Victor said, standing. "Now, butterflies or not, you need breakfast. Brain food for a big day. The morning proceeded with the structured routine that Isaiah preferred. Breakfast. A whole grain toast, scrambled eggs and apple slices, followed by a shower and careful dressing in the new suit Victor had ordered specially for the ceremony. The navy blue jacket fit perfectly over Isaiah's crisp white shirt, and the small gold pin on his lapel, a Fibonacci spiral, added a personal touch that made the formal attire feel less alien to the 8-year-old. As Isaiah fastened the final button, his phone chimed with a notification. His expression brightened. Dr. Ramirez sent me a good luck message from Stanford. Dr. Elena Ramirez, Isaiah's mentor at Stanford's advanced mathematics program, had been the first to recognize his extraordinary abilities when he solved an equation that had stumped her graduate students. Her guidance had been instrumental in his development, providing challenges that kept his brilliant mind engaged. That was thoughtful of her, Victor said, adjusting his own tie in the mirror. Ready to go? Isaiah took a deep breath, patted the tiger perched on his pillow, and nodded. Ready. The ride to Columbia University, where the ceremony would be held, was quiet. Isaiah watched the city pass by, mentally calculating distances and angles as a self-soothing technique. Victor allowed him this space, understanding his son's need to process in his own way. As their car approached the campus, Isaiah's eyes widened. A crowd had gathered outside the mathematics building, not just academics and press, but ordinary people holding signs. We stand with Isaiah. Brilliance has no age limit. Judgment is the poor man's equation. The incident on the plane had indeed struck a chord. What had begun as a viral video had transformed into a movement overnight. Dad, Isaiah whispered, shrinking slightly into his seat. There are so many people. Victor reached for his son's hand. They're here to support you, Anak. You don't have to speak to anyone except the people inside. Focus on your speech, on why you're here. Isaiah nodded, his small fingers tightening around his father's. One variable at a time, that's what Dr. Ramirez says. Wise advice, Victor agreed, as the car stopped at the private entrance. Security personnel immediately surrounded them, creating a protective corridor from the car to the building. Isaiah kept his eyes forward, his presentation folder clutched tightly to his chest as cameras flashed and reporters called questions. Victor's hand remained on his shoulder, a steady presence amid the chaos. Inside the grand hall, decorated with portraits of mathematics luminaries from throughout history, a different atmosphere awaited. Here was order, respect, the quiet reverence of academic achievement. Dr. Chen greeted them at the entrance, her smile warm and genuine. Isaiah, I'm so pleased you decided to continue with today's ceremony. The entire board is looking forward to your speech. Isaiah nodded, momentarily too overwhelmed to speak. We've made some adjustments to the program, Dr. Chen continued, addressing Victor. In light of recent events, we believe Isaiah should be the final speaker. Rather than opening the ceremony, it seems appropriate. That's fine, Victor agreed, his protective instinct still evident in his posture. Isaiah? The boy nodded again. I'd like that better. Time to observe the other speaker's techniques. Dr. Chen laughed softly. Always the analyst. Well, we begin in 30 minutes. There's a private room prepared for you both until then. The green room was mercifully quiet, with comfortable chairs and a table of refreshments that Isaiah didn't touch. He sat reviewing his notes one final time, while Victor fielded messages on his phone, occasionally glancing up to check on his son. The video from the plane has over 10 million views, Victor said quietly. Your name is everywhere this morning. Isaiah looked up, his expression complex. Is that good or bad? Victor considered the question carefully. It's significant. People are talking about important issues because of what happened. Sometimes it takes a single incident to illuminate larger patterns, like how a specific case can reveal a universal mathematical principle, Isaiah suggested. Precisely, Victor said, his pride evident. You're the specific case, Anak, but the principle affects millions. A soft knock at the door signaled it was time. Isaiah stood, straightening his jacket with a precision that belied his nervousness. Victor knelt once more, adjusting his son's collar unnecessarily, a father's way of offering comfort through small gestures. Remember, Victor said softly, whatever happens out there, I am already proud beyond words. Isaiah nodded, his eyes suddenly glistening behind his glasses. Even if I forget the middle part of my speech? Even then, Victor assured him. Especially then. The grand hall had filled to capacity during their preparation. As they entered through the side door, Isaiah immediately registered the demographics: academics, students, press, and a surprising number of children close to his own age, brought perhaps to witness history or find inspiration. Dr. Chen approached the podium, her voice carrying through the perfect acoustics of the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this extraordinary session of the International Mathematics Hall of Fame. As the ceremony began, Isaiah sat perfectly still beside his father in the front row, his posture straight, his eyes alert. Each inductee presented their work: breakthrough proofs, revolutionary algorithms, elegant solutions to long-standing problems. Some speakers acknowledged Isaiah directly, noting the extraordinary circumstances that made this day even more significant. Isaiah absorbed it all, occasionally whispering observations to his father, who nodded with understanding. This was their private language, a synthesis of mathematics, philosophy, and the unspoken bond between them. Finally, Dr. Chen returned to the podium. And now the moment we've all been waiting for. It is my profound honor to introduce our youngest ever inductee into the International Mathematics Hall of Fame. At just 8 years old, he has already contributed to the fields of advanced calculus and number theory. His paper on prime number distribution patterns has been described by Dr. Terence Tao as genuinely revolutionary. Please welcome Isaiah Manalo. The applause was thunderous. Isaiah rose, straightened his jacket one final time, and walked alone to the podium. A discreet step stool had been placed there, allowing him to reach the microphone comfortably. He surveyed the audience, taking a measured breath as the applause continued. When silence finally fell, Isaiah Santiago Manalo, son of a Filipino immigrant who had changed global communications, youngest inductee in the Hall of Fame's history, and now an inadvertent symbol for something larger than mathematics, began to speak. I love math because numbers never judge you. Isaiah's voice, clear and steady, carried through the hall without hesitation. The audience leaned forward collectively, captured by the contrast between his small stature and the gravity of his presence. People sometimes do, but numbers don't. 2 + 2 = 4, whether you're tall or short, rich or poor, whether your skin is light or dark, whether you're a child or an adult. He adjusted his glasses, a scholarly gesture that drew smiles from the academics in the front rows. In mathematics, what matters is the process, the understanding, the truth of the solution. Nothing else. From the audience, Victor watched his son with contained emotion, noting how the initial nervousness had evaporated once Isaiah began speaking about the subject he loved. The boy's hands, which had trembled slightly on the podium at first, now moved with confidence as he illustrated concepts with precise gestures. Yesterday, on my way to this ceremony, something happened that many people have now seen online. Isaiah paused, his expression becoming more solemn. A woman decided I didn't belong in first class because of how I looked. She planted her phone in my backpack and accused me of stealing. A ripple of murmurs passed through the audience. Those who hadn't heard the story exchanged shocked glances. It was scary, Isaiah continued, his voice softening momentarily before regaining strength. But as I sat there, watching everyone look at me with suspicion, I kept thinking about variables and constants. In an equation, variables change. They're unpredictable. Constants stay the same, no matter what. He straightened his shoulders, his eyes scanning the crowd with surprising directness for a child his age. I realized that prejudice is a variable. It changes based on who you are, where you are, what you look like. But truth is a constant. It doesn't change even when people refuse to see it. In the third row, a young black girl about Isaiah's age nudged her mother and whispered something that made the woman nod with tears in her eyes. A professor from MIT scribbled furiously in his notebook, and in the back of the hall, unnoticed by most, Gerald Park stood quietly, having flown to New York specifically for this moment. I'm standing here today because truth is a constant, Isaiah continued, because evidence matters, because allies spoke up. His voice grew stronger, more passionate, and because my father taught me that your value isn't determined by other people's assumptions. It's determined by what you know to be true about yourself. Victor swallowed hard, maintaining his composed expression through sheer willpower. Mathematics has always been my safe place, Isaiah said, his hands now still on the podium. When the world gets loud or confusing or unfair, I retreat into numbers. They make sense when people don't. They follow rules that never change based on who's solving the equation. He paused, looking directly at the children in the audience. To every kid who's ever been told they don't belong somewhere because of how they look, or how old they are, or where they come from, remember that you're not defined by other people's variables. You're defined by your own constants, by what you know, what you love, what you contribute. The hall was utterly silent now, hundreds of people hanging on every word from this remarkable child. I accept this honor today not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever felt out of place, for every brilliant mind that's been overlooked because it didn't fit someone's expectation, for every constant that's been mistaken for a variable. Isaiah's voice carried his final words with quiet conviction. The most important equation we'll ever solve isn't found in textbooks. It's found in how we see each other. Thank you. For 3 heartbeats, silence held the room in suspension. Then, like a dam breaking, applause erupted. Not the polite academic acknowledgement of earlier speakers, but a standing ovation that shook the walls. People rose to their feet, many wiping tears, others nodding in profound agreement. Dr. Chen approached the podium, visibly moved as she presented Isaiah with the Hall of Fame medal, a golden disc engraved with the Fibonacci spiral. The flash of cameras captured the moment, a distinguished older woman bending to place the honor around the neck of a small boy whose wisdom had transcended his years. As Isaiah returned to his seat, Victor embraced him briefly, whispering, "Perfect execution, Anak. Not a single error in your equation." Isaiah's smile was subtle but genuine, the expression of someone who had translated personal pain into universal truth. The ceremony concluded with closing remarks from Dr. Chen, but all eyes remained on Isaiah. As attendees filed out for the reception, a steady stream of people approached to congratulate him. Professors, students, parents with children in tow who asked shyly for autographs. Isaiah handled each interaction with surprising poise, thanking people sincerely for their kind words, signing programs with careful penmanship, and answering mathematical questions from curious children with patience and clarity. During a brief lull, Victor touched his son's shoulder. "Do you need a break? We can find a quiet corner." Isaiah considered, then shook his head. "Not yet. This is important." 2. The next person in line was Gerald Park, his expression humble as he approached father and son. "Isaiah, Mr. Santiago, I flew in this morning. I needed to hear what Isaiah had to say." Victor's expression remained neutral, but Isaiah stepped forward. "Did it help, Mr. Park?" The older man nodded, his eyes glistening. "More than you know. You've given this old man a lot to think about." "That's what good equations do," Isaiah replied earnestly. "They make you think differently about problems." A reporter approached next, microphone extended. "Isaiah, your speech has already gone viral online. How does it feel to become not just a mathematics icon, but a symbol for social justice at only 8 years old?" Isaiah glanced at his father, momentarily overwhelmed by the question's scope. Victor nodded encouragingly, but remained silent, allowing his son to formulate his own response. "I'm not a symbol," Isaiah said finally, his voice thoughtful. "I'm just a kid who loves math and wants to be treated like everyone else. If my story helps other people be seen correctly, then that's a positive outcome from a negative input. Mathematicians call that an absolute value function." The reporter blinked, then laughed with genuine delight. "That might be the most brilliant answer I've ever received." As the reception continued, Dr. Elena Ramirez from Stanford finally made her way through the crowd, enveloping Isaiah in a warm hug. "Mi pequeño genio, your speech was magnificent." Isaiah's face lit up at the sight of his mentor. "Dr. Ramirez, you came all this way?" "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," she assured him, greeting Victor with a respectful nod. "Victor, you've raised an extraordinary human being, not just an extraordinary mind." "The credit is his own," Victor replied. "I merely provided stable variables." Dr. Ramirez laughed. "Always with the mathematics metaphors in this family." She turned serious, kneeling to Isaiah's level. "Your father called me last night about what happened on the plane. Are you truly all right, Isaiah?" The boy considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "I think so. It hurt, but it's like when you're solving a difficult proof. Sometimes the struggle is part of finding the solution." Dr. Ramirez shook her head in wonder. 8 years old, she murmured. with the wisdom of 80. As the reception wound down, exhaustion finally began to show in Isaiah's posture. Victor smoothly intervened, thanking the remaining well-wishers and guiding his son toward the exit where their car waited. In the quiet sanctuary of the back seat, Isaiah finally relaxed, leaning against his father's arm as the car navigated through New York traffic. "Dad?" he asked, his voice heavy with encroaching. "Sleep." "Yes, Anak? I think I'm ready to go home now." Victor kissed the top of his son's head. "Soon. But first, I think we should get ice cream. Celebrations require proper constants." Isaiah smiled, his eyes already closing. "Chocolate with rainbow sprinkles is definitely a universal constant." "Absolutely proven," Victor agreed, watching his extraordinary son drift into well-earned sleep. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Isaiah sat cross-legged on the living room floor of their Palo Alto home, surrounded by thank you cards in various stages of completion. Each one contained a personalized message and a small hand-drawn Fibonacci spiral, his signature. Despite Victor's offer to hire someone to help with the overwhelming correspondence, Isaiah had insisted on answering each letter himself. "People took time to write to me," he'd explained. "It's only fair I take time to write back." Victor leaned against the doorframe, watching his son's methodical process. "How many more to go?" Isaiah looked up, pushing his glasses back into place. 73, I'm doing 15 per day, so approximately 5 more days. Your time management skills rival my executive team," Victor observed with a smile. Isaiah returned to his current card. "Ms. Thompson sent another email. She wants to know if we'll participate in her documentary." Ciara Thompson, whose video evidence had helped exonerate Isaiah on the plane, had experienced her own life changes since that day. A freelance videographer before, she'd received funding to create a documentary about bias and prejudice through the lens of Isaiah's experience. "What do you think?" Victor asked, sitting on the couch near his son. "It's entirely your decision." Isaiah carefully placed his completed card in the finished pile before answering. "I think it could help other kids, but I don't want to be on camera a lot. Could I just do one interview?" "I'm sure that can be arranged," Victor replied. "I'll have Maya respond." Tomorrow, Maya Chen, the newly hired family assistant, had proven invaluable in managing the unexpected attention surrounding Isaiah. A former teacher with degrees in both education and communications, she balanced protection of Isaiah's privacy with thoughtful engagement with worthy causes. Isaiah nodded, satisfied, and reached for another blank card. "Dad, have you decided about the scholarship fund?" Since returning from New York, Victor had been developing what he called Project Isaiah, a $100 million initiative to identify and support brilliant children from underrepresented backgrounds. The idea had come to him during Isaiah's speech, and he'd been refining it ever since. "The board approved the final structure this morning," Victor confirmed. "We launch next month. The first scholarships will be awarded in January." Isaiah's eyes brightened. "Will I get to meet the recipients?" "If you want to," Victor said, "though there's no obligation." "I want to," Isaiah said decisively, "especially the ones who like mathematics." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Victor checked his watch. That must be Dr. Ramirez. Isaiah quickly stacked his cards and pens into neat piles. "I've solved the equation she sent. It took 3 days, but I found an elegant solution." Victor smiled at his son's excitement. Elena Ramirez visited weekly, bringing mathematical challenges that kept Isaiah's brilliant mind engaged. Their sessions had become a highlight of the boy's schedule. The housekeeper showed Dr. Ramirez into the living room. She carried her usual weathered leather satchel bulging with papers, and her face lit up at the sight of Isaiah. "There's my favorite mathematician," she exclaimed. "Ready for some multivariable calculus today?" Isaiah jumped up, already heading toward his study room. "I solved the Bernoulli distribution problem. I want to show you my approach." Dr. Ramirez winked at Victor as she followed Isaiah. "I brought something special today. A problem from the upcoming International Mathematical Olympiad. The committee chair is an old friend." Victor watched them go, grateful for Elena's presence in Isaiah's life. She understood both his intellectual needs and his emotional ones, treating him neither as a prodigy to be exploited nor as a child to be coddled, but as a unique individual deserving of tailored guidance. While Isaiah and Dr. Ramirez worked, Victor retreated to his home office, using the uninterrupted time to review the final details of Project Isaiah. The initiative would identify children with exceptional abilities, not just in mathematics, but across all fields, and provide them with resources, mentorship, and safe spaces to develop their talents. His phone chimed with a notification. A new email from Gerald Park had arrived. Since the ceremony, the retired investor had undergone something of a transformation. His experience on the plane and at Isaiah's speech had triggered deep reflection about his own biases. Now he was requesting a meeting to discuss contributing to Project Isaiah. Victor composed a polite response, suggesting coffee the following week. People could change. He'd seen it firsthand, and Park seemed genuinely committed to making amends. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Maya entered with a tablet in hand, her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Santiago, I have news about Ms. Miller." Victor set down his pen. Diane Miller had faced both legal and professional consequences for her actions on the plane. The airline had pressed charges for creating a disturbance, and Santiago Industries had terminated her employment immediately. "What's happened?" "She's given an interview," Maya said, handing him the tablet. "It's not what you might expect." Victor scanned the article, his expression carefully controlled. Diane Miller had spoken to a major news outlet about the incident, but rather than defending her actions or claiming victimhood, she had offered a complete confession and apology. "I acted out of prejudice, resentment, and a profound sense of personal failure," she was quoted as saying. "Nothing excuses what I did to that child. I've spent these weeks in therapy, confronting the ugliness within myself that led to such reprehensible behavior." Victor continued reading, his brow furrowing slightly. Miller had declined her lawyer's advice to fight the charges and had instead pleaded guilty, accepting community service and mandatory diversity training. She was now working with an anti-bias organization, sharing her story as a cautionary tale. "She's requested a private meeting with you and Isaiah," Maya said quietly, "to apologize in person. I've declined 3 times, but she's persistent." Victor set the tablet down. "Continue declining. Isaiah doesn't need to revisit that trauma, regardless of her apparent redemption." Maya nodded. "Of course. Also, there's been another development with the airline. They've completed their internal investigation and have implemented new training protocols for all staff. They're calling it the Manalo Protocol." A slight smile touched Victor's lips. "Fitting. They're also offering lifetime first-class upgrades for both you and Isaiah. Donate the equivalent value to Project Isaiah," Victor replied without hesitation. "We don't need incentives to be treated with basic dignity." Maya made a note. "One last item. Isaiah's interview with Time magazine is scheduled for Thursday at 4 p.m. They've agreed to all our conditions. Limited time, pre-approved questions, no photographs without consent, and Maya present throughout." "Thank you," Victor said, genuinely appreciative of her thoroughness. "Has Isaiah completed his prep questions?" "Yesterday. He was very articulate about wanting to focus on mathematics rather than the incident." Victor nodded. "That's my son." Later that evening, after Dr. Ramirez had departed and dinner had been cleared away, Victor found Isaiah in the garden observatory. The glass-domed structure housed a powerful telescope, a gift for Isaiah's 7th birthday, and had become his favorite place for reflection. "Stars tonight?" Victor asked, entering the climate-controlled space. Isaiah looked up from the eyepiece. "Jupiter and its moons, the mathematical precision of their orbits is beautiful." Victor sat beside his son on the padded bench. "Dr. Ramirez mentioned you made exceptional progress today." "The IMO problem was fascinating," Isaiah confirmed. "It involved non-Euclidean geometry applied to number theory. Very elegant." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the observatory's soft lighting creating a peaceful atmosphere. Isaiah eventually spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Dad, do you think what happened to me on the plane happens to other kids a lot?" The question, coming unexpectedly, made Victor pause. He'd been careful not to overburden Isaiah with the heavier implications of the incident, while still acknowledging its significance. "Yes," he answered honestly, "to kids and adults. Perhaps not always so dramatically, but yes." Isaiah nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. The statistical probability seemed high based on the messages I've received." He returned to the telescope, adjusting it slightly before continuing. "I think that's why it's good that people know about what happened, like how astronomers share data about celestial anomalies so others can learn from them." Victor studied his son's profile, once again struck by the unique way his mind processed the world. That's a very insightful perspective. The universe operates on patterns, Dad, Isaiah said simply, both the astronomical one and the human one. Victor placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. Just remember, you're not responsible for fixing all those patterns. You're allowed to just be a boy who loves mathematics and stars. Isaiah smiled, the expression illuminated by the soft blue glow of the observatory controls. I know, but maybe the patterns I discover can help others find their own solutions. As Jupiter's moons traced their perfect orbits through the telescope's lens, father and son sat together beneath the glass dome, two constants in an equation of variables that extended far beyond them both. The conference room at Santiago Industries headquarters fell silent. As the presentation concluded, 20 executives, innovation leads, and education specialists sat processing what they'd just heard, the comprehensive blueprint for Project Isaiah, now officially named the Santiago Foundation for Exceptional Minds. Victor stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding as always, but today there was something different in his demeanor, a personal investment, beyond business objectives. Questions, he asked, surveying the room. Anika Patel, head of the company's educational technology division, raised her hand. The scope is ambitious, even for us. 100 children in the first year alone, across 5 continents. Is that a question or a concern, Anika? Victor asked mildly. Both, she admitted. I fully support the vision, but the logistics of identifying these children, especially in underserved regions. We've already secured partnerships with educational institutions in 27 countries, Victor interrupted smoothly. Dr. Elena Ramirez has assembled a team of specialists to develop culturally appropriate assessment tools that identify potential without Western educational biases. He tapped his tablet, bringing up a new slide. Additionally, we're not limiting ourselves to traditional academic brilliance. The Foundation will recognize exceptional abilities across multiple domains. Mathematics, certainly, but also language, music, visual spatial reasoning, interpersonal intelligence, and others. Marcus Chen, the company's chief financial officer, spoke next. The budget allocation is substantial. Shareholders may question the ROI. Victor's expression cooled slightly. This isn't a profit center, Marcus. It's a separate foundation with its own endowment. That said, the long-term societal benefit of identifying and nurturing exceptional minds that would otherwise be overlooked, particularly from marginalized communities, should be obvious even from a purely economic standpoint. He glanced around the room. Any other concerns? Hearing none, Victor continued. Implementation begins next month. I'll be personally involved in the Foundation's launch, though day-to-day operations will be handled by the team we're assembling. Maya Chen has agreed to transition from our family staff to serve as the Foundation's executive director. Maya, seated midway down the table, nodded in acknowledgement. Her experience managing the aftermath of Isaiah's incident had revealed organizational talents that impressed even Victor. One final note, Victor said, his voice softening slightly. This project was inspired by my son, but it is not about him. Isaiah will have no public role in the Foundation unless he chooses one in the future. This is about creating opportunities for children who don't have the advantages he has. Is that clear? Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Excellent. Thank you all for your input throughout this development process. Maya will coordinate with each department on next steps. As the meeting dispersed, Gerald Park approached Victor near the door. The former investor had indeed met Victor for coffee the previous week and had subsequently volunteered his considerable network and resources to the Foundation. Impressive presentation, Park said. I've scheduled meetings with 3 potential donors next week. All have expressed significant interest. Victor nodded. Thank you, Gerald. Your support has been unexpected but valuable. Park's expression turned reflective. Second chances matter, Victor. Your son taught me that. Later that afternoon, Victor arrived at Isaiah's school for their weekly lunch date. Unlike many prodigies, Isaiah attended a regular school, albeit with a specialized curriculum and flexible scheduling that accommodated his advanced studies with Dr. Ramirez and other mentors. Victor had insisted on this arrangement, believing strongly that his son needed both intellectual challenges and normal social experiences. Isaiah emerged from his classroom, backpack neatly arranged over both shoulders. His face brightened at the sight of his father. "Dad, we're doing a unit on astronomical mathematics, and Miss Winters used my observatory calculations as an example." Victor smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder as they walked toward the car. "That's wonderful. Did you explain your methodology to the class?" "I did a mini presentation," Isaiah confirmed. "Some kids asked good questions afterward." This was progress. In the months since the plane incident and subsequent media attention, Isaiah had gradually become more comfortable sharing his knowledge with peers. Previously, he had often hidden his abilities to avoid standing out. "Any preference for lunch?" Victor asked as they settled into the car. "The sandwich place with the good pickles," Isaiah suggested, buckling his seatbelt with methodical precision. "Perfect choice." At the small deli, tucked away on a quiet Palo Alto street, father and son settled into their usual corner booth. The owner, Mr. Abramowitz, nodded in recognition but maintained their privacy, one reason Victor appreciated the establishment. Over sandwiches, Isaiah recounted his morning classes, his descriptions precise and detailed as always. Victor listened attentively, noting the increased mentions of classmate interactions, another positive development. "Dad," Isaiah said suddenly, his tone shifting, "Carter invited me to his birthday party on Saturday." Victor paused mid-bite, recognizing the significance. While Isaiah had been invited to academic events and enrichment programs, social invitations from peers had been rare. "That sounds like fun," Victor replied carefully. "Would you like to go?" Isaiah considered, methodically reorganizing his potato chips into a geometrical pattern. "I think so. His mom called Maya to say it's just a small gathering. Pizza and a movie at their house." "What movie?" "The new Pixar film about the mathematical cat who solves mysteries." Victor smiled. "Sounds perfect for you. Will you come too?" Isaiah asked, a hint of nervousness creeping into his voice. "I can drop you off and pick you up," Victor suggested gently. "But I think this is the kind of event where parents don't usually stay." Isaiah nodded slowly, processing this information. "Right. That makes sense statistically based on my observations. They have social patterns." Victor suppressed a chuckle at his son's analytical approach to birthday party etiquette. "We could practice some typical party conversations if you'd like." "That would be helpful," Isaiah agreed earnestly. "Social algorithms still require refinement in my operational protocols." This time Victor did laugh, reaching across to ruffle his son's neatly combed hair. "You sound like a robot when you talk that way." Isaiah grinned, a full, unguarded expression that had become more frequent in recent months. "Beep boop. This unit requires calibration for optimal human interaction." Their laughter drew a smile from Mr. Abramowitz as he refilled their water glasses. As they finished their lunch, Victor's phone chimed with a notification. He checked it briefly, then looked up at his son with a measured expression. "Isaiah, do you remember Ms. Thompson, the woman from the plane who filmed the incident?" Isaiah nodded. "She's making the documentary. I agreed to one interview. She's just sent the first cut for our review," Victor explained. "We don't have to watch it if you don't want to." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, absently tracing equations on the table with his finger. Is it very focused on what happened on the plane?" "I haven't seen it yet," Victor admitted, "but we can watch it together, and if it's uncomfortable, we'll turn it off immediately." Isaiah considered this with his characteristic thoroughness. "I think we should watch it, for data collection purposes." That evening after dinner, Victor and Isaiah settled in the home theater room. Maya had reviewed the documentary earlier and confirmed it was tastefully done, but the final decision remained theirs. As the film began, Isaiah sat cross-legged on the large couch, his stuffed tiger positioned beside him. Victor watched his son more than the screen, alert for signs of distress. The documentary, titled Brilliant Assumptions and Reality, opened not with the plane incident, but with statistics about bias in education. Experts discussed how children from certain backgrounds were systematically underestimated, regardless of their abilities. Isaiah's story was introduced 20 minutes in, presented as one vivid example of a broader pattern. When footage from the plane appeared, carefully edited to protect Isaiah's privacy while still conveying the intensity of the confrontation, Victor tensed, but Isaiah watched with scientific detachment, his head tilted slightly as if studying an interesting mathematical problem. The film then transitioned to the aftermath. Isaiah's speech at the Hall of Fame ceremony, shown in full, the public response and the tangible changes that had resulted, from airline training protocols to educational initiatives. It concluded, with brief interviews with children from diverse backgrounds who had been inspired by Isaiah's experience to pursue their own intellectual passions more openly. As the credits rolled, Victor turned to his son. "What do you think?" Isaiah adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. "It effectively uses the specific to illustrate the general. The statistical evidence was well presented. And how do you feel about your story being used this way?" Isaiah considered the question with characteristic seriousness. "It's, strange to see myself as a variable in someone else's equation. But if the solution helps others, then the application is valid." Victor smiled at his son's unique perspective. "You continue to amaze me, Anak." Isaiah leaned against his father's side, a rare physical initiation of contact. "Dad, I've been thinking about what Ms. Miller did." Victor tensed slightly. Diane Miller remained a sensitive subject. "What about her?" "In mathematical terms, she introduced a false variable into the equation," Isaiah said thoughtfully. "But the result actually clarified the underlying formula." Victor considered his son's words. "That's a remarkably generous interpretation." Isaiah shrugged. "It's just pattern recognition. Her negative action produced positive outcomes that wouldn't have occurred otherwise. That's a mathematical reality." Victor put his arm around his son's shoulders, once again struck by the unique brilliance of his mind, not just in solving equations but in making sense of a complex and often unfair world. "The most elegant solutions often come from unexpected variables," he agreed softly. 6 months had passed since the incident on the plane. Spring sunshine bathed the Santiago Foundation's newly completed headquarters in warm light as Isaiah walked beside Maya through the modern, open-concept building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of carefully landscaped gardens, while classrooms and laboratories were equipped with state-of-the-art technology. "What do you think?" Maya asked, watching Isaiah examine the mathematics lab with critical precision. "The whiteboard wall space is excellent," he approved, pushing his glasses up. "And I like that the tables are adjustable for different heights." At 9 years old now, Isaiah had grown an inch taller, though he remained small for his age. Other changes were more significant. He carried himself with quiet confidence, engaged more readily with peers, and had even developed a subtle sense of humor that occasionally surprised adults. "The first group of scholars arrives next week," Maya reminded him. 35 children from 17 countries. Isaiah nodded, mentally reviewing the profiles he'd studied. Each child had demonstrated exceptional abilities in various fields: mathematics, music, language, visual arts, and each came from circumstances where those talents might have gone unrecognized without intervention. The youngest was 6, the oldest 14. "Is everything ready for them?" he asked. "Practical as always." "Almost," Maya smiled. "We're still finalizing a few host families and some travel arrangements for parents who are accompanying the younger children." They continued their tour, passing classrooms designed for different disciplines. In the music studio, Dr. Elena Ramirez was consulting with an acoustics specialist, but she paused to wave at Isaiah. "Checking our progress, Senor Mathematician?" she called. Isaiah smiled. "Making sure the parameters meet specifications." Dr. Ramirez had joined the foundation part-time as academic director, while maintaining her position at Stanford. Her expertise had been invaluable in designing assessment tools and curriculum frameworks that identified and nurtured exceptional minds without forcing Western educational models onto children from different cultural backgrounds. In the central atrium, Victor was engaged in conversation with Gerald Park and several Foundation Board members. Seeing Isaiah and Maya, he excused himself and joined them. "What's the verdict?" he asked his son. "Does the reality match the blueprints?" "The execution is precise," Isaiah confirmed, "though I have suggestions about the library collection." Victor's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Of course you do. We'll discuss them over lunch." As they walked toward the cafeteria, designed to accommodate dietary preferences from around the world, Maya's tablet chimed with a notification. "The final confirmation just came in," she announced. "All 35 scholars are officially approved for travel. We're at 100%. Victor nodded with satisfaction. "Excellent work, Maya. I'll inform the board." The cafeteria was already staffed and operational, preparing for the influx of young scholars. As they settled at a table with their food, Isaiah arranged his plate with methodical precision before speaking. "Dad, I've been thinking about the welcoming ceremony." Victor raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "I'd like to address the scholars," Isaiah said carefully, "not as the founder's son, but as a peer who understands what it's like to be different." Victor and Maya exchanged glances. Isaiah had largely avoided public speaking since the Hall of Fame ceremony, despite numerous invitations. "Are you sure?" Victor asked gently. "There's no expectation for you to take on a public role." Isaiah nodded decisively. "I'm sure. These children are coming to a new country, many without their parents. Statistical probability suggests they're experiencing anxiety about fitting in. I have relevant experiential data to share." Victor's expression softened with pride. "Then we would be honored to have you speak, Anak." The conversation shifted to other topics as they ate. Isaiah's recent progress in quantum mathematics, the upcoming school science fair where he was partnering with a classmate for the first time, and his weekend plans to attend a coding camp with several friends from school. This last point still amazed Victor. In the months following the plane incident and subsequent media attention, Isaiah had gradually developed genuine friendships with several classmates. The birthday party had been a turning point. His analytical approach to social situations had actually endeared him to several children, who found his unique perspective fascinating, rather than strange. After lunch, as they walked through the gardens, Isaiah suddenly stopped by a bench overlooking a small pond. "Dad, do you ever think about Ms. Miller?" The question caught Victor off guard. They rarely discussed Diane Miller, who had completed her community service and continued working with anti-bias organizations, sharing her story as a cautionary tale. "Occasionally," Victor admitted. "Why do you ask?" Isaiah sat on the bench, his legs dangling above the ground. "I received a letter from her last week. Maya forwarded it after reviewing it." Victor controlled his surprise, glancing at Maya, who nodded confirmation. "What did she say?" "She apologized again," Isaiah said simply, "but differently this time. Not just about what she did, but about who she was. That day she said she's learning to solve for different variables in her life equation." Victor sat beside his son, choosing his words carefully. "How did that make you feel?" Isaiah considered the question with his characteristic thoroughness. I think it completed a proof I've been working on." "What proof is that?" "That people can change their trajectories when confronted with enough evidence," Isaiah explained. "It's mathematically sound. Introduce a sufficient force and even the most established path can be altered." Victor marveled once again at his son's capacity to translate human complexity into mathematical principles, not to oversimplify but to find order and meaning in chaos. "She asked if she could volunteer with the foundation," Isaiah continued, "not working with children directly, but helping with administrative tasks. She has relevant corporate experience." Victor was quiet for a moment, processing his own complex emotions. The woman had caused his son pain, had acted from prejudice and malice. Yet Isaiah, with his remarkable mind, had found a way to integrate that experience into a coherent worldview that allowed for redemption. "What do you think we should do?" he finally asked. Isaiah adjusted his glasses thoughtfully. "In calculus, integration finds the whole from fragmentary parts. Maybe this is an integration problem, not a subtraction one." Maya, who had remained silent during this exchange, spoke softly. "We do need additional administrative support for the international coordination team." Victor looked between them, then nodded. Slowly. "I'll consider it, but any decision would involve strict parameters and a probationary period." Isaiah smiled slightly. "That's mathematically sound risk management." As they continued their tour of the foundation building, Victor observed his son with quiet wonder. The boy who had once retreated into equations when the world became overwhelming was now applying mathematical principles to navigate human complexity with remarkable wisdom. Near the end of the day, they stopped at the foundation's main entrance, where a simple plaque had been installed beside the door. It read, "The Santiago Foundation for Exceptional Minds, where brilliance is measured by potential, not perception." Isaiah read it aloud, then nodded with approval. "Elegant and accurate." As they prepared to leave, Isaiah paused to look back at the building, a tangible manifestation of how a single difficult experience had transformed into something that would benefit countless children. "Dad," he said thoughtfully, I think we've created a very beautiful equation. Victor placed his hand on his son's shoulder, feeling a profound mixture of pride, love, and gratitude. We have indeed, anak. We have indeed. Chapter: The Great Hall of the Santiago Foundation was filled to capacity. Parents, educators, media representatives, and community members had gathered for the inaugural welcoming ceremony for the first class of Santiago scholars. The 35 children sat in the front rows, a diverse group ranging in age, ethnicity, and background, united by the exceptional abilities that had brought them here. Victor stood at the podium, his presence commanding as always, but today he spoke not as a corporate titan but as the Foundation's creator. Today marks the beginning of an extraordinary journey, he said, his voice carrying through the hall without need for amplification. These young scholars represent not just individual brilliance but unlimited human potential that too often goes unrecognized. He gestured to the children, whose expressions ranged from nervous to excited to solemnly attentive. Each of you has been selected, not just for what you've already achieved, but for what you might achieve in an environment that celebrates your unique mind. From his seat in the front row, Isaiah watched his father with quiet pride. He wore a new suit for the occasion, navy blue, with the same gold Fibonacci spiral pin on the lapel that he'd worn at the Hall of Fame ceremony a year earlier. This foundation exists because of a single incident that revealed a universal truth, Victor continued, that our perceptions often blind us to the extraordinary minds in our midst, particularly when those minds exist in bodies that don't match our expectations. Several audience members nodded in recognition of the reference to Isaiah's experience, which had become widely known through Kiara Thompson's documentary and subsequent media coverage. Today, I'm honored to introduce someone who understands precisely what it means to be underestimated, to be brilliant in ways that challenge conventions. My son, Isaiah Manalo Santiago. The applause was warm as Isaiah approached the podium. A small step stool had been discreetly placed there, allowing him to stand comfortably at the microphone. At 9 years old, he still needed it, a practical accommodation that Victor had insisted become standard for all Foundation events, regardless of the speaker's age. Isaiah surveyed the audience with calm confidence, his gaze lingering on the young scholars in the front row. "Hello," he began simply. "My name is Isaiah, and I love mathematics. I love how numbers create patterns that explain everything from how planets move to how music sounds beautiful. I love that equations don't care who solves them. They only care that the solution is correct." He paused, adjusting his glasses in what had become a characteristic gesture. "Last year, something happened that many of you probably know about. A woman on a plane decided I didn't belong in first class because of how I looked. She planted her phone in my backpack and accused me of stealing." The hall was utterly silent, audience members leaning forward to catch every word from the soft-spoken boy. It was scary, it was unfair, but it taught me something important, something I want to share with you. His eyes focused on the young scholars. People will often try to define you by what they see, not by who you are. They'll create an equation about you based on incomplete variables, but you get to solve for X yourself. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. That doesn't mean it's easy. Sometimes the variables are complex, sometimes there are multiple solutions, but your brilliance isn't determined by anyone else's calculations. From the audience, Dr. Elena Ramirez watched with undisguised pride. Beside her sat Gerald Park, whose contribution to the Foundation had grown to include a personal mentorship program for scholars interested in business and finance. In the back row, Maya Chen observed with professional satisfaction, while beside her, in her first official capacity with the Foundation, Diane Miller took notes on community engagement opportunities. The journey from that tense aircraft cabin to this moment had been complex, with many unexpected variables, yet somehow the equation had balanced. "When I came to this country as a child," Victor had once told Isaiah, "I carried equations in my head because they were lighter than books, and no one could take them from me. To me, mathematics was my passport when I had nothing else." Now, looking at the 35 young scholars, Isaiah continued his address. "At this Foundation, your mind is your passport, your curiosity is your credential, and your unique way of seeing the world is your greatest strength." He stepped down from the podium to stand directly before the children. "I'm not here as the founder's son today. I'm here as someone who understands what it's like to think differently, to see patterns others miss, to feel both the wonder and the weight of how your mind works. A young girl in the front row, Amara from Nigeria, a mathematical prodigy discovered in a rural village, nodded in silent understanding. Over the next 3 weeks, Isaiah continued, you'll meet mentors who speak your intellectual language. You'll use technology that might be new to you. You'll explore subjects at the pace your mind naturally works, not the pace a standard curriculum dictates. He smiled fully now, his expression warm and genuine. But most importantly, you'll meet others like you. And in my experience, that's when the most beautiful equations are solved, when minds that understand each other work together. As Isaiah returned to his seat beside his father, the applause was thunderous. Victor squeezed his son's shoulder gently, a silent communication between them that conveyed more than words could express. The ceremony continued with introductions of key foundation staff and an overview of the program. When it concluded, the scholars were led to a welcome reception in the atrium, where interactive displays and refreshments awaited. Isaiah moved among them easily, his initial social awkwardness having evolved into a quiet confidence. He was particularly drawn to Amara, who clutched a worn notebook filled with calculations similar to those he had created at her age. Your approach to prime factorization is interesting, he told her, pointing to an equation. Have you considered applying a Fibonacci sequence here? Her eyes widened. You understand my work? Of course, Isaiah said simply. The math speaks for itself. From across the room, Victor watched the interaction with profound satisfaction. The foundation represented a substantial financial investment, but seeing his son connect with another brilliant young mind made every penny worthwhile. Dr. Ramirez joined him, following. His gaze. He's come so far, she observed, from the boy who would only speak to his stuffed tiger about mathematics, to this young man who reaches out to others. He still talks to the tiger occasionally, Victor admitted with a smile. But now it's to practice explaining concepts before he shares them with friends. They watched as Isaiah led Amara to the mathematics lab, already deep in conversation about number theory. Other scholars began to follow, drawn by the animated discussion. You've created something remarkable here, Victor, Dr. Ramirez said softly. Not just the foundation, but in how you've raised Isaiah to transform adversity into opportunity. Victor shook his head slightly. Isaiah did that himself. I merely provided stable variables in his equation. Later that evening, after the scholars had departed for their host families and the staff had completed their debriefing, Victor and Isaiah walked through the quiet gardens of the foundation. The setting sun cast long shadows across the carefully designed landscape where every plant had been selected to demonstrate mathematical principles found in nature. Fibonacci spirals in sunflowers, fractal patterns in ferns, the perfect symmetry of certain leaves. You spoke beautifully today, Victor said as they paused by the small pond. I was very proud. Isaiah nodded, watching the geometric ripples spread across the water's surface. It felt different than last time. Less like proving a point and more like sharing a solution. That's an insightful distinction, Victor observed. Isaiah was quiet for a moment, formulating his thoughts with characteristic precision. Dad, do you think we've solved it? The equation that started on the plane. Victor considered the question carefully, knowing his son sought a thoughtful answer, not platitudes. I think we've found a particular solution, he said finally, but the general case, the larger societal equation, will require many more mathematicians, working on it for a very long time. Isaiah nodded, accepting this nuanced response. That's why the foundation needs to continue, to develop more minds that can work on complex problems. Exactly. They continued walking in comfortable silence until Isaiah spoke again. I met a boy today, Mateo from Brazil. He sees music as colors and patterns. His mind works differently than mine, but we still understood each other. Different approaches can lead to the same solution, Victor noted, or to entirely new solutions we haven't imagined yet, Isaiah added, his eyes bright with the possibility. As they reached the foundation's entrance, they turned to look back at the building, illuminated now by subtle lighting that highlighted its innovative architecture. In just 6 months, it had transformed from blueprint to reality, much as the plane incident had evolved from trauma to catalyst for change. You know, Isaiah said thoughtfully, in mathematics, the most elegant solutions often arise from the most challenging problems. Victor placed his arm around his son's shoulders, feeling the solid presence of this remarkable child, who continued to teach him as much as he taught. Isaiah. Indeed they do, Anak, he agreed softly. Indeed they do. As they walked to their waiting car, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, celestial constants that had guided travelers for millennia. Isaiah glanced up at them, his mind automatically calculating distances and trajectories, finding patterns in their arrangement. In that moment, everything aligned. The boy who loved. Numbers, the father who had created a sanctuary for exceptional minds, and the infinite possibilities that lay before them both. The equation that had begun in chaos on an airplane had balanced into perfect, elegant equilibrium. And in mathematics, there is no greater beauty than a perfectly balanced equation.